Hello everybody, this is Dean Benard speaking. Welcome to our webinar, Investigation Planning. I'd like to begin by thanking you all for taking the time to view this recorded webinar. Our goal with these brief webinars is to provide you with a look at some of our educational offerings. With this in mind, these are not intended as comprehensive talks on subjects, but rather an overview. We offer customized workshops that can range from a few hours to a week, depending on your needs. So if you like what you see here, feel free to contact us anytime to discuss the possibilities for a more in-depth workshop or seminar that might benefit your organization. Now let's get started. An investigation plan is a blueprint for any investigation, and it's often one of those things that is given little attention. In this presentation, I'm going to make a case for why a plan is important and how it can benefit the investigation process as it unfolds. Now, Yogi Berra once said, if you don't know where you're going, you might wind up someplace else. And I've been told in the past that every good presentation has a quote in it, so there's my quote, like it or not. Anyway, let's get started. Why is an investigation plan essential? Well, it forms the backbone of the investigation. It provides structure that's going to guide you the rest of the way through the investigation and creates a blueprint. Once you have a handle on the issues, it's going to let you know what information you need to gather. Another benefit of it is that it assists or obliges the investigator to consider certain aspects of the case, the scope of the investigation, identifying issues that might require investigation, determining which information is relevant, establishing timelines for the investigation, ensuring that the investigation moves forward in a proper fashion. And in terms of ensuring that the investigation moves forward, it really can provide important evidence to explain or justify decisions in the context of a challenge. So at some point, if your investigation interview or investigation process is challenged, you can go back to your plan where you'll have notes of what you did, why you did it, why you made certain decisions. All of these things are incredibly important and can be helpful. In terms of planning considerations, first thing you have to consider is what's the scope of the investigation. Consider whether you have an enabling statute or case law in your jurisdiction that confines the scope of the investigation. In most cases, you cannot and really should not decide to investigate outside the scope, and this is a problem that I've seen in many investigation reports that I've reviewed. New information, can come up. Sometimes this changes things. Sometimes it may result in a whole new investigation being started, but these are the types of things that should be considered very carefully. What specific issues are you requiring or require investigation? There's professional standards in place that might help you determine what evidence you need to gather. What materials are presently available for the review? Start with what you currently know, or what you have in front of you. Then start asking yourself the question, what don't I know based on this information, and how am I going to find out? Logistical considerations. How much time is going to be required to do this investigation? How many people are involved? Am I going to have to travel for this investigation? Do I anticipate any obstacles or challenges to the investigation? All of these are things that are going to come into your mind while you're going through the process of planning. What do the statutory provisions require? You have to be familiar with your governing legislation and assume that you're operating under a formal authority. This may affect timing in some investigation processes. For example, in Ontario, if you're working for a health regulator, there are timelines that have to be considered that are really legislated guidelines in terms of when things have to be completed. So these are obviously good things to incorporate into your plan. Should you consult with others? Could be managers or colleagues who may have experience with a similar type of investigation and can give you some advice. It might be legal counsel who might want to chime in with some helpful advice or direction. It could be another statutory body that is worth consulting with to gather additional information. And this should be an ongoing question throughout your investigation. Too many times I've seen investigators making decisions unilaterally that really should involve others, and we can talk a little bit more about that later as this presentation unfolds. What evidence is going to be required to assess whether an incident or certain type of conduct occurred? Break it down. Consider how you can prove or disprove each element of the issue at hand. Again, a good plan is going to help you give thought to these things in advance. Oftentimes, timing issues are dictated by strategy. Concerns about the availability of evidence. Might it be destroyed? Do you have a limited period of accessibility? If possible, maybe you want to gather some evidence before the subject is even aware of the investigation. If you've got concerns about destruction of evidence, that would be an important consideration. Timing issues are sometimes dictated by the seriousness of an issue. In some cases, we need to consider, if our failure to act quickly might create some sort of legal or other liability. Could you be sued for not dealing with a matter quickly enough? Will press be critical if you're too slow? Will the public lose confidence? All of these are things that are important considerations in determining what the timing of the investigation will be. What is your power to compel cooperation? Do you have any powers available to you? Do you have an investigator appointment that conveys upon you certain powers that you can use to compel people to cooperate with you? Again, a very important thing to consider. And even concurrent investigations. Sometimes concurrent investigations create timing issues and evidentiary issues. For example, criminal matters. Maybe a case is being investigated or has been investigated by the police, and the evidence you need isn't available to you because it's already been gathered. In fact, sometimes that can be the other way around. What if you've gathered the information and the police want it? So all of these are things that creating a good plan will impact on and be helpful to you. Now, in terms of the plan itself, I've got 8 things that I think are good elements of an investigation plan, and we do need to make a strong investigation plan. And so we start with the obvious, a contact list. Everybody who's connected to this investigation, including how to get in touch with them, should be part of the plan. Background information. What led up to the investigation? Why are you conducting this investigation? How are people connected to this? It's just a brief overview, understanding where this investigation originated and how. A list of the issues. The details that make up the issue are going to help you determine what evidence you need. Witnesses. Who do you need to talk to in order to find out the issues or the information about the issues at hand? Just having a list of witnesses is very important. In terms of documents, what information might be helpful? Are there documents that can be obtained, and are you going to run into any difficulties in trying to obtain them? Even the interview sequence plan. Usually the person bringing forward the issue is interviewed first, and the person who's the subject of the interview or of the investigation may be interviewed last in some situations, or may be interviewed second in other situations. And so, again, something to consider for your plan. And then, of course, logistical concerns. What can be done over the phone? What do I need, original documents, or can I get copies of documents? All of these things are going to impact your investigation and be something that should be considered. And finally, logging or recording your activities. I find that investigators that work in certain sectors often don't document their own actions. They proceed to gather information, and they do so very diligently and in good faith, but don't document what they did. They don't document necessarily where a document came from or how they came to get it, whether it was received by registered mail or whether they actually attended to pick it up. Some of these things can be important details that can be necessary to share later. And so logging these activities as part of your plan is very important, because this plan is not going to be static. This plan is something that's going to change as the investigation unfolds, and this documentation can be included in that. Answer the 5 W's. So, just go through it. You should be able to look at each issue and say, based on your plan, who's involved, what's the issue, where and when did the act or omission take place, the circumstances leading up to it. When your plan does this, you know exactly what's been done and what needs to be done. And I can't emphasize this enough. It's basic, but it's important. Remember the 4 corners of the investigation. Consider whether you have the authority to investigate what you're investigating. Sometimes information comes up that falls outside the original issue. Do you have the authority to investigate that? Are you going to create a problem by trying? The investigation must always relate to the complaint if it is in fact a complaints investigation. It can expand further to include other instances involving other people for similar conduct, but in a limited way. Sometimes you're looking at a pattern of behavior, but you have to be careful. It shouldn't encompass, other unrelated conduct. You might be investigating issue A because you stumble upon the fact that there's an issue Z. doesn't mean that you have the authority to investigate issues, Ed. Maybe you need to bring that back to your organization and say, okay, I've uncovered this additional information. What are we going to do with it? And maybe additional investigations will be authorized. Maybe another investigator will be engaged to fulfill that aspect of the investigation. There can be ramifications if you use powers of investigation provided for one purpose to fulfill another purpose. So you have to be very careful that your investigation stays within that scope, within that four corners, and the powers you use to gather information are used only for that purpose. In terms of gathering evidence, there's going to be evidence that you need, and there's going to be issues in terms of how you get it. With respect even to interviews, who's going to be interviewed? What will be the sequence of those interviews? Do I anticipate any reluctant or difficult interviews? Will I do them in person or will I do them over the telephone? All of these are important considerations. In terms of physical evidence, this could be things like clothing, syringes, pill bottles, hairbrushes, anything at all. Do I have any evidence like that? If I do, how am I going to take care of that evidence? We have a whole other talk that we're going to be adding to our series on handling evidence, and that's something that, if not done properly, can jeopardize an investigation. So, it's good to give thought to these things. Photographic evidence, are you going to obtain photos from the internet? Is there going to be surveillance photos? Are you going to take photos of the evidence? All of these things are important considerations. And you have to also consider how you're going to get this information. Are people likely to hand over what it is you're asking for? Are you going to need consent? Is consent even sufficient in certain circumstances? Do you have powers of investigation? Do you have the ability to summons or even obtain a search warrant if necessary? Depending on your jurisdiction and the types of things you're investigating, you may have zero power to tremendous power. Understand what those powers are and how you can appropriately use them. These are the types of things. Are you going to need to make an application under the Freedom of Information Act? Most jurisdictions do have some form of freedom of information or access to information legislation that exists, and you may need to abide by that. In terms of documents, when you're thinking of documentation, you need to think about everything related to the case. Did someone keep a note of the issues for their personal reference? Are there letters, minutes from meetings that might help you fill in some of the blanks or give you background information? Professional documentation, are there standards that professionals have to abide by? Those standards can be a very good guide on what and how things are supposed to be done. Health records in certain circumstances, maybe you're dealing with a subject of investigation and there might be some concern about their capacity, be it physical or mental, and are those documents that you may be able to obtain or should be obtaining. Remember, though, that contemporaneous documents will always have the strongest evidentiary value. So documents that were made during or very briefly after a situation took place are going to be the best documents that will assist often in an investigation. In terms of document types, there's all kinds of different ones, and I've listed some of them here, but workplace policies and procedures, maybe you want to get access to a person's HR file. There can be a number of different things. Police reports, maybe that might speak to a person's pattern of behavior. If there's been other issues raised about this individual in other venues, or even previously within the organization that you work with, these are all very important pieces of information that might help you. If you're doing a regulatory investigation, you might be able to get a member or registrant's or licensee's previous discipline file, and maybe there's similar fact information or prior information there that speaks to this person's conduct. In terms of sources of documents, I believe you should always start with the easiest to obtain. So these would be publicly accessible documents, and you can see I've listed a number of them here. Corporate searches, patents and trademarks, media sources, any number of things, court documents, transportation records. If you're in Canada, Ministry of Transportation documents, well, in Ontario, but your license histories, can give you address information, all kinds of things. All of this can be just a very helpful helpful information which is available to you, often free, mostly free, and is, as I said before, publicly accessible. There's other types of documents though. Police or other regulators to determine if there's been any past issues that might be related to the current matter. A person's HR file, as I mentioned earlier. Banks and insurance companies may have information that's important to obtain. Now again, recognizing that many of the people listening to this are not necessarily individuals who have powers of investigation. Or you could be like me. We do regulatory investigations, but we also do workplace investigations. And in both cases, there's a big difference in terms of the powers of investigation that we have. As a workplace investigator, it's very rare that you can compel the production of information. In fact, not only is it very rare, it's non-existent. Unless it's within the organization that's retained you to conduct the investigation. Otherwise, you're relying mostly on documentation that's volunteered to you, or documentation that perhaps the organization can provide to you. Going outside the organization for information is simply not an option. Some special considerations when doing your planning. Are you going to do undercover operations? Is surveillance going to be required? I mean, these types of approaches require some very specific planning and very specific considerations to ensure that they're done right and that they're done appropriately. So, if you plan to undertake these efforts, you have to ensure that you know what you can and cannot do. Now remember, things are going to change, so constantly reassess the case as you go. Be particularly prepared for changes with respect to witnesses. Witnesses may be cooperative or they may not be cooperative. You may find that you come across new information, new witnesses, new evidence. Maybe your timelines are going to be altered. Don't think of your investigation plan as a document that you create once at the beginning of the investigation and don't touch again. It should be a living document that reflects your approach to the case throughout, because your approach may need to be revised, and that might be just to simply respond to changes in circumstances. And don't delete your earlier plan. Keep it. Again, having your investigation plan can be a great document for you to use. In fact, if your investigation plan is put together properly, it can often be a great outline for what will eventually be the report. So, your plan can serve two purposes and ultimately save you some time. Now, in terms of investigation planning, remember, good investigations are well planned. Investigators can be a target. They can be a target of defense. Sometimes people will not be able to argue a case on its merits and rather have to look at process and argue a case based on process or based on the people involved in that process. So it's really important that you document what you do, why you do it, and have a plan, because you can fall back on that as to support you, and it supports your credibility if you're questioned or challenged about how you conducted yourself. Again, consultation is a smart thing to do. Be very careful about making unilateral decisions. There are going to be key moments within investigations where decisions have to be made about how you'll proceed. If you're going to undertake some unique form of investigation, maybe you want to do an undercover, maybe you feel the need to do surveillance on somebody, make sure the organization's on board with that. Make sure that you've consulted with the right people, that is considered appropriate in the circumstances. Sure, if you're an experienced investigator, you may know that, but why put yourself out there and make that decision by yourself when, if it's criticized later, you're going to be standing alone? It's always good to have the confidence of others standing behind you. Also, it's very important to document what you didn't do. This may be as important as documenting what you did do. So, in your plan, if you choose not to pursue something, maybe there's some witnesses that you could have interviewed, but for whatever reason you felt it was unnecessary. Maybe those people, you didn't feel those people would provide relevant information, or maybe some people were not available to be interviewed. If that's the case, document that. Keep that as part of your plan. Because again, this is a great way of documenting and justifying the decisions that you make later if you're questioned. Understand all the goals and in every aspect of the investigation. Make sure you know what it is you need. Understand the facts and issue, and consider those when you're putting your plan together. Maintain control of the process, but be flexible. It's sometimes important to be able to look at a different way of approaching the investigation and your plan, again, as a living document, may change. Remember, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And I said I was only going to have one quote, but I guess I decided to add another one. Planning can't be emphasized enough is the importance of it. It really is something you want to do. Now, this is a very short presentation, but it cuts to the chase and provides hopefully some helpful information. I hope that this was helpful to you, and I want to thank you for your time. If you are interested in further information about educational offerings that we have, feel free to contact me anytime. My contact information is on the screen. And again, thank you very much, and all the best.